Hi, Robert. Welcome on the Abundance Makers podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so I'm very much honored to have you on the podcast. I've been reading your books. I've been listening to your speeches for years. So I started, of course, with the case for Mars, which is quite well worn out. Then I continued with the case for space, and you published a book earlier last year, The World We Can Build on Mars. So I have so many questions to ask you. So let's jump in. But first, I would like you maybe to react to the plan that Elon Musk shared recently, the latest updates to its plan. I think you say that he's on his march to Moscow, to to make a reference to Napoleon. So can you maybe elaborate on that?
Well, sure. Well, in general, I mean, Musk has a lot of similarities to Napoleon. He is a genius, but he, with incredible accomplishments that has caused him to rise in the world to spectacular heights. But, the reason why Napoleon failed in his invasion of Russia was because he had succeeded at everything he had done before. And so it's a matter of hubris, overreach. There were many French generals who told Napoleon, why don't we just take Poland and call it good? And which they could have easily done, and secured an independent Poland as a very solid ally of France, more or less forever. But instead he said, well, you people always urge caution before. You were always wrong. I was always right. We're going to Moscow. And so Musk has accomplished many great things, but he has made a play for supreme power, and he just got a very strong rebuff from Trump on that. But to come to the issue of Mars itself, look, Starship is a very good vehicle to use as a reusable heavy lift launch vehicle. It has a payload capability 3/4 that of a Saturn V and 5% the cost. So it's great for that. Now, the Musk plan of sending starships to Mars has some merit too, although it requires refueling the Starship on orbit in order to send it to Mars. And if the Starship actually meets all of its design objectives in both payload capability and keeping its own weight down, it would take 3 tankers to refuel one Starship to fly one way to Mars with no payload. And depending upon the payload you add, it could take 5 or 6 tankers. Now, if the Starship payload capability to orbit, instead of being 100 tons, is 50 tons, then it would take 12. And now we're getting out of control. So there are some questions with that, but in principle, it could be done. The place where Starship starts looking bad is using it as an Earth return vehicle from the surface of Mars, because it's so heavy. This is also the weakness with the Starship plan to use Starship and Artemis as a lunar ascent vehicle. Starship weighs 100 tons. The lunar excursion module we used in Apollo weighed 2. So getting, there's some merit to thinking about sending a Starship one way to the moon or Mars. Now you've got an apartment house on Mars, but to send it back is a real task. Now, of course, the Musk plan for Mars involves refueling the Starship on Mars with locally produced propellant, and that is an idea that you got from me. That's why the Starship uses methane oxygen propellant, which is a very good propellant, and which the materials for making it do exist on Mars: carbon dioxide and water. And I and others have demonstrated the processes that would allow that to be done in an automated fashion. That said, returning a Starship from the surface of Mars and sending it back to Earth would require making 600 tons of propellant on the surface of Mars. If I believe that what is needed is a mini-Starship for Earth return. That would require 100 tons to come back all the way from the surface of Mars to Earth. And it would only require 50 tons to go from the surface of Mars to Mars orbit to rendezvous with a Starship that you could put in Mars orbit and return in that. So, as we could reduce the amount of propellant you need to make on Mars by a factor of 10, which is enormous in its significance. Similarly, the moon program, trying to come back from the moon with a Starship means you've got to do about 14 tanker flights to do a single Starship mission to the surface of the moon. Putting a Starship in orbit around the moon and using the mini-Starship, or Starboat, as I call it, as a surface to orbit ferry would reduce that radically. It means you could do several lunar missions with a single Starship flight. And that's the way to do it. Now, Musk has not been willing to listen to that. He wants to do everything one size fits all. I think that's a technical mistake, and it needs to be remedied. It needs to be remedied if Artemis is to be successful. You need Starship plus Starboat. If you want the Mars program to be successful, you need Starship plus Starboat. But then there's another issue, which is that Musk is focused only on his own vision of Mars, which is rapid settlement. And for the purpose of trying to rapidly create a city on Mars which somehow could survive if the Earth is destroyed. Now, this is a bad concept, both technically and philosophically. It's a bad concept technically because there's no way that a million-person civilization on Mars could survive as an autarky if the Earth is destroyed. Frankly, the United States can't survive as an autarky. That's why the stock market crashes whenever Trump says he's going to put a 500% tariff on the rest of the world. That he's going to basically blockade the rest of the world so America can make everything itself. And America's got 330 million people. So autarky is not possible on Earth or Mars. But the other thing is philosophically, we're not going to Mars to desert the Earth. Musk is taking his concept from a science fiction trilogy called Foundation by Isaac Asimov, where there was this scientist who knows that the galactic empire is going to collapse, and so he forms a colony called Terminus, because it's on the edge of the galaxy, of scientists who will then be able to reemerge after the galactic empire collapses to reestablish civilization. It's a great story. I highly recommend the book, but it's unworkable. It's very unattractive. It would cause the program to be viewed in a very dim light by everyone else. Oh, you're going to Mars to survive while the rest of us die. It's more like, Edgar Allan Poe has a story, The Mask of the Red Death, in which there is a plague in which a bunch of rich people go into a castle to party while everyone outside dies. And that didn't work out too well for them, and it wouldn't work out too well for Mars colonists. But that's not the reason why we're going to Mars. We're going to Mars.
But to be fair to Elon Musk, I think what he's saying is that yes, we need to start civilization on another planet, but he's looking at the very, very long term. Like, he's not saying that the Earth will get destroyed anytime soon. In the very long term, this has to be done. And since we are about to be able to do it, let's just do it because it's fun. It's fun to have a space program. It's fun to go to Mars.
Well,
so he's not. Yeah.
Well, no. This is not true.
Because he's developing Tesla to fix, the climate here.
It is. This is not so, because Musk is saying we have to get this done in the next 50 years. He's not talking about doing this before the sun explodes. He's talking about doing this within the next few decades. And his method he proposes for colonizing Mars is more akin to the Normandy landing than, for instance, the colonization of America. Okay, he wants to take 1,000 starships, each with 100 colonists, and land them on Mars at once. That's 100,000 people. It's just about as many as landed on Normandy on D-Day. And then, the next launch opportunity land another 100,000. So you get 1 million people on Mars within 10 years. This is, first of all, this would never work. In order to have 1 million people on Mars, or 100,000 people on Mars, or 10,000 people on Mars, you have to build up the agriculture and industrial base on Mars to support them in advance. We could supply the troops on Normandy Beach because, in 4 hours you could get a Liberty ship across the channel and it could transport 10,000 tons of supplies. The Starship can transport 100 tons of supplies, and it takes 6 months to fly from Earth to Mars, and cost a lot more than a Liberty ship. So the idea, you can't supply a Mars colony from Earth. You can supply a Mars expedition of 4, 5, 6 people from Earth, but not a colony of thousands, let alone millions. And so the way Mars colonization will occur is that first you have a small outpost of 10 people, then 20 people, and then you build a greenhouse, and now you can have 50 people, and now you can build more things and support 100 people, or then 500 people, just as the European outposts in America grew in the 1600s. It took 100 years from the Pilgrims landing on Plymouth to when America first had a population of 1 million people, a century. And I would anticipate that's about how long it will take after we first establish our first outpost on Mars till we have 1 million people there. It's an organic process that has to be done. So I think the technical solution is wrong, and I think the ideological basis of it is wrong. And it is particularly wrong because, look, Musk got drunk with power when he basically became an extremely powerful person in the Trump administration by funding Trump's electoral victory and having a major role within the administration. And he set up this outfit called the Doge, in which he has a bunch of young guys loyal to him running around destroying various government programs. And one of the programs that they decided to destroy was NASA's space science program. Cutting NASA's space science budget in half. Now, this is not only going to destroy NASA's space science program, it's going to doom Musk's Mars program. Because, look, the fortunes of political war are always changing. If you make this Mars program all about Elon Musk and Donald Trump, it will be destroyed as soon as they lose power. Especially if you make enemies of the space science community. And it's totally stupid, really, because the Mars program should be the greatest friend of the space science community.
But if he makes the Starship work, don't you think a Mars mission, a human Mars mission to Mars will happen irrespective of whoever is in power? Because it will just be cheap enough and large enough, and people will just pay for it?
It cannot be done if the powers that be on Earth are opposed to it. They will find ways to make it impossible. For instance, they will claim that it violates the planetary protection protocols. Nuclear power. It's been successful in France because you had a multi-party coalition ranging from the communists to the Gaullists that supported it. But in the United States, it became controversial with one of the major parties hostile to it, and it's been aborted. And so we have, the first nuclear power plant we had here, it took us 3 years to build it. Now it takes 16. in the early 70s, we were getting an order for a new nuclear power plant every month. Now, one a decade. Because it's been strangled by political hostility.
But
So you don't want that. You don't want that to happen to space settlement.
But so you said it yourself. I think there are some SpaceX copycats blooming in China. So it's just a matter of time before one gets it right. And there's also some competition between the US and China, first to be back to the moon, or to be on the moon for the first time for the Chinese. But then Mars will be next in sight. So
the question is not whether humans will go to Mars eventually. You're asking whether Musk's Mars program.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And the thing is this: look, instead of making his program the enemy of space science, this program should be the friend of space science. It should be justified by space science. The first Starship that lands on Mars should go with a platoon of robotic explorers. If he says he can land 100 tons on Mars, let's say he can really land 30. That's still great. The most we can land now is 1 ton. Okay, 30 tons. We'll land 15 rovers and 15 helicopters, not just little helicopters like Ingenuity, but big ones carrying lots of
instruments. That would be amazing, yeah.
And they could go and fan out all over the landscape, collecting samples from near and far and bringing it back to the lander, where we could have a full laboratory of instruments to examine all the samples. And so you've got 30 vehicles and a full lab, and each of these vehicles is carrying 5 or 6 instruments. So you've got over 100 teams of scientists involved in the mission.
But he might as well do that. He might as well do that. He might as well do that.
Well, he's not going to do that if you kill the budget that funds the building of all the rovers and the helicopters. Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, if you want to do a Starship,
but these rovers, since you don't have to optimize, to make things so small, you don't need to, it doesn't have to be that expensive to build rovers, right?
Well,
so probably.
They have to be able to work on Mars. What I'm saying is that, look, okay, first let me just say what the right program should be before we get too lost in this. Okay, Musk claims he's going to launch a Starship to Mars next year. That's not happening. That's a lie. Okay, with a lot of work and a lot of luck, they might be able to launch a Starship one way to Mars in 2028. That's possible. So to do a robotic Mars mission with a Starship to Mars, landing a robotic expedition on Mars. Okay, that, however, doing that, in addition to Starship being pushed forward, you'd have to expand the NASA space science budget to produce the rovers and the helicopters and the science instruments and fund the science teams that will exploit those instruments and so forth. Okay, and ideally, in fact, you'd want to do this as a program of the free world working together on this. Minimally, it has to be an American program. It can't be an Elon Musk program. Yeah. That's the thing. That's the thing. So if you did it that way, okay, you would unite the science community behind the Mars program. They would say, this is the greatest thing for science. We're for this. And the science community, it's bipartisan, but it leans left. It means that you'd have bipartisan support for this. People would say, this is great stuff. Right now, they're saying this is the mad project of a Bond villain.
Yeah.
And that we can't have that.
And so you've spoken to him about the Starboat design idea.
Yes, I have.
And what does he have to say? Because it's quite compelling.
What he has to say, I'll give him half credit for it, is he asks the right question, which is, why do I need it? Okay. And that's a good question to ask. It's a question that NASA does not ask often enough. Okay. I'll give him credit for that. But the problem is that he's really stuck on this idea of Starship and just Starship. And okay. And now one can go overboard with specialization and have a different kind of rocket for everything. But the but I think this is a case where going to two sizes fits all does a lot of good. And Starship plus Starboat can give you both the moon and Mars. And that's important too, because in addition to the Democrats who will oppose the Musk program so long as it's a Musk program and not an American program or a science program, the other people who would be inclined to oppose the Musk Mars program are the moon advocates. You say, you want to bypass the moon? We love the moon. You say, no, we're not going to bypass the moon. With Starship plus Starboat, we will do both the moon and Mars.
And also about the Starboat design, I think originally you had an idea of a three-stage rocket, so the booster, and then you would have broken down the Starship itself into two pieces. So how did you evolve from the three-stage design to the Starboat design? Because a few years back, you were advocating a different design itself instead of the Starship.
Okay, well, no, 3 years back, I advocated, I didn't call it Starboat, but basically
the mini BFR.
Mini-Starship, yeah, right. That would be a payload that would be brought to orbit by Starship, which would be, or it could get to orbit by being the upper stage of the Falcon 9. That is, if you imagine Starship scaled down to be the upper stage of the Falcon 9. So now, if you just view that, that would be a fully reusable medium lift system that would have a lot of utility. But it would also be a way to get the Starboat to orbit. The thing about lifting it on a Starship, however, is you could lift it fully fueled and then just shoot it straight off to Mars without having to do orbital refueling. Now, I haven't gone into detail on the design of the Starboat. I'm mostly addressing the requirements for it, what it has to be able to do, and what it should be like. And basically, I want something with a mass 1/10 to 1/5 that of the Starship, something that could be lifted fully fueled on a Starship and shoot off to Mars, or which would require a delta V of 4 kilometers a second. Interestingly, the delta V to go from lunar orbit to the lunar surface and back up again is also 4 kilometers a second. The delta V to go from Mars surface up to Mars orbit is 4 kilometers a second. So basically, if you have something that's kind of like this that can do a 4 kilometer second delta V, I wanted to use methane oxygen propellant so that it's fully compatible with Starship, so it can be refueled on Mars, so it can be operated as a lunar orbit to surface ferry using a Starship tanker as its refueling base in lunar orbit. These are the kinds of things that it has to be able to do. Now, its exact form, that there's engineering trades you could do that, but that's what it has to be able to do.
And could it be lifted to orbit by a New Glenn rocket if it's not as full, the Starboat? Like, could it be developed by Blue Origin, for instance?
Yes, certainly. It absolutely could be an upper stage for the New Glenn.
Wow.
And sure, or even a Vulcan. No, there's a lot of ways to do it. And if Musk doesn't want to develop it, it should be developed by someone else. And if necessary, NASA should fund its development by someone else. NASA has this program called the National Lander, because what happened was after SpaceX got the contract to do the human Mars lander, the competition led by Blue Origin and Lockheed Martin complained they wanted to have a contract too, and they yelled and they screamed, and they had sufficient political support to give a contract to them for a moon lander too. Now, unfortunately, NASA did not insist that it be compatible with Starship. So the National Lander, as currently conceived, uses a different propellant, uses hydrogen oxygen propulsion. So there's no way to support it in operation as now it would be an expendable lander. But really, I think that what NASA should do is tell the national team, we're changing the requirements. You can still have your contract, but instead of building this hydrogen oxygen lander, we want you to build a methane oxygen starboat. Yeah.
And dwelling on Blue Origin, so my understanding is that you inspired Musk with your case for Mars. So and the same thing happened with Jeff Bezos with Gerard O'Neil, and free floating colonies.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, but I'm sure he would have heard about you, obviously, Jeff Bezos. Have you ever heard back from him? Have you ever interacted with him? Have you ever pitched him?
I've only interacted with him briefly. He did invite me to come to Blue and give a briefing to their advanced concepts team, which I did. But no, Bezos' inspiration was from Gerard O'Neil, not from me.
Yeah. But I mean, one doesn't have to exclude the other, right? So maybe we'll see some competition to go to Mars between Blue Origin, especially if I don't know if he proves to be a bit more rational and I don't know gives a shot to your design idea. Maybe we'll see some interesting stuff unfolding in the future.
Well, it's possible. I hope so. I think that Gerard O'Neil's vision is flawed. Basing space settlement on solar power satellites, and the statement that you're going to move heavy industry off of the Earth and put it in Earth orbit, this doesn't make sense to me. But nevertheless, Blue has been founded, and now it can develop space systems, and it can and should develop something like the Starboat. Yeah.
But I think what you're criticizing about that design is the business case in a sense. But the idea of having maybe not as big as what he intended in the first place, but huge, space station using rotation to recreate Earth's gravity. This is something that's going to happen probably before we have a Mars settlement. And this,
no, I disagree. Right? I disagree with that. That's going to happen maybe 300 years after there's a Mars settlement. Look, settling Mars.
It depends on the size, right? If we're talking about something like 500 meter wide in terms of diameter, of course, it's not a settlement. It's quite small, but it's probably.
An O'Neil colony involves billions of tons.
We're not talking about the same scale. Yeah.
Okay, a Mars colony involves sending thousands of tons of material from Earth to Mars and then making the rest there. So there's a million times more transport involved in building an O'Neil colony than building a Mars colony. It's much easier to settle a world than to build one.
Yeah. I think you said we need to master fusion first, and maybe in some centuries, then we can disintegrate some asteroids and build the free-floating colonies. But that will come next.
Yeah, no, I think yes, I think free-floating space colonies will come someday, but it is well after planetary settlements.
But one concern I have, I mean, I'm a big fan of what you're doing, but one concern I have is you're projecting that world on Mars and that future on Mars. But what if, Mars gravity is just a huge blocker for us. We just cannot thrive. We cannot give birth. We without very strong, very heavy bioengineering, we just cannot live healthily on Mars. We need to disprove that or prove that first before making, very ambitious plans. So it's
certainly we will find out about the effect of Mars gravity on when we first send explorers to Mars. In other words, we're not going to land 1 million people on Mars and then say, how does Mars gravity affect people? No, the first mission that goes to Mars is not going to be 1 million people or 1,000 people. It's going to be 5 people. And they'll be taking some chances. We'll be taking a lot of chances, and frankly, much more serious chances than the health effects of 1/3 gravity. But nothing great has ever been accomplished without risk. Now, as we go from a Mars expedition to a Mars base, with instead of there being 5 people, there being 20 people, 50 people, we'll get more and more experience with Mars gravity. And, at some point, perhaps when we have a 50-person Mars base, the couple will have a child on Mars, and we'll see how well such a child will grow and develop in 1/3 gravity, and we'll find out if there really is a problem here. And if there is a problem with that, which I actually don't believe, but if there is, it will be resolved using biotechnology. And that will then happen before there is large-scale settlement of Mars. But I think that it is likely that we find that people can develop just fine in 1/3 gravity, although I think people born on Mars will not like coming to Earth because they'll experience gravity that's much heavier than what they're used to.
Yeah, so it may take some time if we need to bioengineer the way we give birth, and also, but indeed the exploration first step, I think this will likely happen. Then for the rest, we don't really know. And so another concern I have is the demographic issue, right? Because we see here on Earth, we're not making enough kids. You see in Japan now, women, they have barely more than one kid, per couple. So you make a lot of references to the British settlement of the Americas, right? But then there was a human surplus because of a rise in agricultural productivity in England, and that was, by the way, also one of the differences with France. The human surplus was larger in England, and so they were able to settle early first, and more broadly the more fertile lands in America, right? But now you see we don't have enough kids. So past the exploration step, how will we have? How can we think of a world in space with millions and trillions of humans? Where we are barely able to stabilize the population on the planet at this point.
Okay. Well, first of all, to address the historical issue, France had a much larger population than England during the 1700s. I think about 4 times the population of England in the 1700s.
No, but it grew slower.
But there were 2 things that prevented French settlement of North America. One was the British went to North America with the intent of forming communities. So they formed communities complete with, schools and churches and all the functions of the community. The French regarded New France as a source of profit and set up fur trade trading posts. Okay, and so French women were in general not willing to go to North America, whereas British women were. Okay, and the other thing was the British allowed religious dissenters to settle in North America, whereas the French did not. Okay. Louis XIV, with a wave of his hand, could have settled New France very heavily if he had allowed the Huguenots to go there. But he prevented it. So there you go. So the reason why we're having this conversation in English right now is French is because of intolerance of religious dissenters by the French monarchy. But but look,
I can easily see tens of thousands of people settling Mars, but millions of people and then making so many children there.
Well, the thing is, you're gonna want. Look. Obviously, the only Mars colonies that will grow are those that attract immigrants, which is why Mars colonies will not be tyrannies, as you sometimes see in science fiction, because no one would go to such places. Okay, and B, the ones that outgrow the rest will be the ones that attract the most immigrants, and B, have children. And they will need to have a culture that encourages people to want to have children.
But we're trying to fix this on Earth, and we have a huge incentive to fix this on Earth, because we have to pay for the retirees in one way or another, and we can't seem to be able to solve that issue. We're trying to.
This is I believe that this is a result of cultural pessimism. And I believe that Mars colonists who conceive of themselves as making a new world will not be cultural pessimists. They will be cultural optimists. And I mean, look, it's not like such people cannot be found. It's that on Earth, the pessimists, people who do not want to have families for one reason or another, outnumber the optimists, at least in the advanced sector at this point, at this particular moment. But you recruit the people who do want to do this, who do want to create a new world.
Yeah, but it's true also that, you know, when we settled the Americas, it was based on communities and farming, and the more children you had, the more they could help you also grow your plot of land. But it's going to be very different on Mars, where, you know, you can only, in a sense, contribute if you're quite educated yourself. So as a kid growing up, you may not be as useful, so it's going to be more a burden than anything. And both parents will have to be active as well and contribute, so they won't have that much time to raise kids. It's going to be a very difficult environment at first, right?
A successful Mars colony will need to think of how it will do things that resolve that problem. Okay, you're going to have to resolve the problem that is the main subject of all the women's magazines, which is how do I have a children and a career, right? But also, I mean, look, I believe that our current education system, as it has been set up in the United States and most European countries, is really kind of a guild system designed to keep people out of professions until they get a variety of certificates. And thus we are prolonging adolescence. You know, people once upon a time would launch their careers when they were 16 or 18 years old. Now it's not till they're 22 or 24 or 26. And we require certificates for people from doing things that they could have done without the certificate. It is a form of labor protectionism, or what in America would be called a poll tax, if you know what that was. That was when they would charge people money in order to let them vote.
Yeah.
And it was designed to prevent the poor, and in particular Black people, from voting by making it too expensive. So if you say, in order to enter this skilled profession, you must have a university degree, then you're excluding people who can't afford the time and money required to get a university degree. So, you know, I think it's actually a form of class oppression that is our current education system is designed to perpetuate. I think on Mars, on the other hand, you're going to have a severe labor shortage. You're not going to want to keep people out of, you're not going to want to prevent people from doing jobs that they can do. All right. You're going to want to make it possible for people to do jobs that they can do. So I think this kind of exclusion through certification systems, that system will not be used on Mars. It certainly won't be used in any successful Mars colony.
Yeah, but also when you see, you know, the advance now, the progress with the humanoid robots and robots of all kind, combined with the progress in artificial intelligence, I mean, it stands to reason that a lot of the tasks that are currently done by humans can be done by robots. And since, you know, as you said, there'll be such a labor shortage in space, the incentive to use robots to do as many things as possible will be huge. And
well,
if anything,
to some extent, however, the problem with robots, I mean, certainly robots will be used. Okay, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing that. But robots have to be made, and they're very complex things that have to be made by a division of labor involving billions of people. Okay, whereas a new person can be made just with 2 people. Okay, and now artificial intelligence is a different thing than robots.
But it's gonna be cheap to import them from Earth. These robots, they might
well,
as well be built on Earth and shipped to Mars.
Well,
It's gonna be cheap. It's gonna be cheaper than send humans.
Well, I don't think so. No, it's not cheaper than human reproduction. I think that artificial intelligence, which will expand the number of skills that any person can have, okay, will be of enormous utility on Mars. That is, ideally, if you could have an artificial intelligence app that would enable anyone to do anything, or almost anyone to do almost anything, then it's not so much a question of expanding the quantity of labor available to you. It's a question of expanding the diversity of labor skills available to you. Okay. You don't need 8 billion people to help you today. But when your washing machine needs to be fixed, you need a person who can fix your washing machine. Okay. And then something else happens and you need a person who can deal with that. So if you have a Mars city of, say, 50,000 people, which is the size of Renaissance Florence, so that can be a real city, a real community. But nevertheless, you could have within it, using artificial intelligence, the full diversity of skills that you have now on Earth with 8 billion people. Then I think such a city could operate, could be prosperous. But to maintain,
could it be self-sustaining? Not at 50,000 people, but 1 million humans plus AI.
Well,
could it be self-sustaining?
Not as an autarky, but trading with others. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I mean, France is not self-sustaining in the sense of an autarky.
Yeah.
United States is not.
It's not desirable. We might as well trade with one another if it makes sense.
Correct. And that is what will also be true on Mars. So on Mars, I believe you'll have a multitude of small cities, and they'll trade with each other, and they will trade with the Earth.
And you wrote that if the Chinese ever really want to compete in space, they're going to need to invoke the forces of liberty. So yes, China is an authoritarian state, but when you look at technological innovation, lately it's not been too bad, right? If you look at EVs, BYD, electric cars, they are crushing competition. They are even crushing Tesla at this point. DeepSeek with AI, they are able to cope somehow. Even if they don't have access to the best microchips, they are still able to compete for now. Drones, they are the world leaders. Now they're talking about the low altitude economy with drone delivery, flying cars. These guys are very much advanced. So what makes you think the Chinese can't compete in space or on Mars, or even though they are more authoritarian? Because what they say is that maybe they're a bit controlling in nature. Of course, it's it's an understatement, but the regulators are quite nimble and can be accommodating when they want an industry to flourish.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. They certainly a lot of these innovations that you just cited are Chinese expanding upon fundamental innovations mostly made in the West. They say, okay, electric cars, got it. Okay, we'll take it from here. Okay.
But that's good enough, maybe in many respects, right?
Well, perhaps. But also you have to understand that an authoritarian country can make gigantic mistakes. For instance, the one-child policy implemented in China was a catastrophe, and it was implemented by an authoritarian government, which In other words, you don't have the same feedback loops, as it were. If if the people on top can just do whatever they want, you have much greater capacity for catastrophic mistakes than you do in a more liberal society. Also, I do believe that talent will flow from places that are less free to places that are more free. If the United States wanted to outcompete China right now, all it really has to do is offer green cards to all educated Chinese. You know, that, in other words, what Trump is doing in saying we're going to get the Chinese out of our universities is the exact opposite of what he should do if he wants to compete with China. What he should do is invite Chinese to study at our universities and give them all green cards, which is the card that you get if you're allowed to be on your way to American citizenship. I mean, America became a superpower by drawing talented immigrants from around the world. We didn't become a superpower by keeping them out. Exactly the opposite. And people say things like, well, you look at all these innovations done in America, and half of them are done by immigrants. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Just so.
Yeah. And so you're very much focused on Mars, obviously, and sometimes it sounds like the moon is a distraction to you. But isn't there a risk that the Chinese, will preempt then the best places there, at the poles where there are these, that ice in the shadowed craters? And I mean, isn't that a concern? And since they're gonna certainly make this a priority as for them, they're gonna go very heavy to the moon. Don't you think we need to keep that in mind as well?
Well, to some degree, but we should recognize, that Mars is the prize. Mars is where the science is, and Mars is where the future is. It's just a much more important destination in space, and Mars is where new branches of human civilization can develop, which will then add their creative power to humanity as a whole, but also their weight, their influence, to the kind of societies that started them. Britain won World War II because it had colonized America. That's why. And I believe that, freedom draws talent, which means freedom carries a stick. The United States won the space race with the Soviet Union because of its greater capacity to mobilize the creative capacities of its population, both through freedom and through free enterprise, even though the program was coordinated by the government. There's a reason why SpaceX was started in the United States and not in Russia. So there's a reason why Starship and reusable rockets are being created by the United States and not by Russia or China. China may copy them, but and then if you talk about Mars colonies are going to need to be extremely inventive. They're going to need to be extremely inventive, both to deal with the challenges of Mars and also to create the inventions that they can license on Earth. That IP is going to be one of their major exports. And they'll need to be free to be highly inventive. They'll need to be free to attract immigrants. The Mars colonies that grow will be those that do have freedom, or at least sufficient freedom, to be attractive to immigrants and to be inventive. And they will then lend their throw weight to the general power of free societies overall, both on Earth and Mars. the you know
Yeah, and so I like to read a quick excerpt from your book. So you said we are not endangered by a lack of resources. We are endangered by those who believe there is a shortage of resources. We are not threatened by the existence of too many people. We are threatened by people who think there are too many people. And I completely agree with that. But I think I would pursue your logic to the end. I would say, some will argue, we don't even need to go to space or to go to Mars, because on Earth itself there's enough to get abundance. There's enough resources. We can unlock almost unlimited energy using fusion, using fission, using solar power. We can grow as much food as we want. We could even be 10 times more numerous on Earth. So we don't need to mine the asteroids or to get deuterium on Mars. We can find everything we want and grow so much more on Earth itself. There's enough on Earth for abundance, for a much more abundant world. So what would you say to those people?
Well, I would say that you're correct, that the resources of the Earth are infinite. However, to try to make people believe that is like trying to convince a mathematically illiterate person that there's an infinite number of points in a line segment that is 1 centimeter long. Okay, it says there can't be an infinite number of points in a line segment that is 1 centimeter long. That's ridiculous. Well, it's not ridiculous, it's true, but people don't see that. But anyone can see that there's an infinite number of points in a line that goes off infinitely in both directions.
Okay.
So, look, think about this for a minute. In 1914, Europeans were living better than they ever had before in human history. Okay? And yet they proceeded to tear themselves to pieces in fighting over who would control it all. Okay.
So you're saying it's just easier to go to space to make that point, even though it could be possible technically on Earth, it's just easier.
It is, precisely so. Look, Hitler starts World War II saying Germany needs living space. Germany never needed living space. Germany today is smaller than the Third Reich, and it has a larger population, and yet it has a vastly higher standard of living. Why? Not because they were successful invading other countries, killing everybody and stealing their cows. They were unsuccessful at that. And if they had succeeded at that, they would be poorer today than they are. Okay, because the reason why Germany today is richer than the Third Reich is because the advance of human science and technology, which has been a global project contributed to by people from almost every nation, and including particularly people they were trying to exterminate. And okay, so yes, it's not true that humans are in a struggle for existence over limited resources. That is the Nazi point of view, and it is false. Okay,
agreed.
But it's a very dangerous point of view, and it is precisely because it appears to be convincing that there's only so much here. There's only so much here. In 1972, there was this elite organization called the Club of Rome that published a report they called The Limits to Growth, in which they
got
said
everything wrong.
Yes, they got everything wrong, but they were very convincing to many people. They published a report and they said, we're going to run out of everything by the year 2000 because there's this much oil reserves and we're using them this fast every year, and they're all going to be gone by the year 2000. And the copper is going to be gone by 1998, and the zinc will be gone by 2001, and so forth. And everything's going to be gone. And it was all nonsense. So it didn't happen. In fact, all of those resources are cheaper today than they were in 1972, as measured in hours of labor time required to get a kilogram of copper or a kilogram of oil. Okay, okay, but wait for it. Around 2006, the Club of Rome had a reunion. Okay, they did, and they got
they could not accept they got it wrong.
And they said, a lot of people think we were wrong, but we may have been wrong about the dates, but we're fundamentally right because there's only so much here. okay,
go around there.
they still couldn't see that they were fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
Because the
Scary.
things that are resources are defined by technology. Technology is created by human invention. The more people, the more inventors, the more inventors, the more inventions, and inventions are cumulative. And that's why there are vastly more resources available today than there were in 1972. And that's why there were vastly more resources available in 1972 than there were in 1872 or in 1072. Okay, but people don't see that. And
that's the psychological aspect of it that you think space can solve.
And this is the greatest threat facing humanity today. This is what is driving the world towards war today. Okay. I know because I have spoken to people in high levels of the American national security establishment who believe that war with China is inevitable because there's only so much oil in the world. And you can bet that there are people just like them in Beijing who think the same thing.
But although they are winning with EVs and they won't need as much petrol as ever, actually they may have peaked in terms of their demand. So that very point on oil, I'm not so sure because that's exactly why they are moving to
do a
EVs.
lot of. It's not just cars. Oil powers ships. It powers airplanes. It powers, and it's used to make plastics, and there's lots of things.
With solar power, you can make electrofuels. You can make hydrocarbons.
But nevertheless, people talk about strategic minerals and the rare earths and this. There's always something that is supposedly only so much of to go around, and why we should kill each other to get it. And look, if you believe there's only so much to go around, then all nations are enemies. And and
it's not a zero-sum game, but it's hard to prove.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you also about the business case, because why would people go there if it's funded by the government or by a billionaire for a very first mission? Okay, then maybe. If you are to say, and you've argued brilliantly that case, like the true reward of the moon program was not so much the space program itself, it was the fact that it inspired so many people to learn their science, and the whole society benefited from that influx of scientists across the board. Forget even space, it was very much broad-based. And so if we are to say, look, we'll go to Mars and it's going to be funded by the government, but the whole society will benefit from it, even back on Earth, then maybe I can see the point. But if we are to make the business case in terms of we're going to make money, enough money to buy what we need and to thrive and grow and prosper, then I may have some concerns, because you mentioned tourism, but how big can that be? No. IP licensing, it's very hard to prevent infringement. It's very hard to, now it's more about, okay, I have developed something and then I need to develop something next because I know people will copy me. It's very hard to get people not to reverse engineer your technology if it's hardware or even your software. So IP licensing, how big can it be? And deuterium exports, once we master fusion, we might as well probably will find a way to make deuterium here on Earth, at a cheap enough level. So how big that business can be on Mars to justify a huge settlement and
let me answer you. Okay, I think the government involvement will be very important at the beginning, but the getting it started and establishing scientific bases on Mars, which will do a couple of things. One, it will lead to understanding the technical issues required to live on Mars and be supportable on Mars. And for instance, it will resolve this question of 1/3 gravity and so forth. It also will lead to the advance of space transportation systems to support this kind of program. Now, however, the development of reusable rockets will inevitably lead, therefore, to a market in used rockets, just as the used cars that are fully functional can be obtained for 1/10 the cost of a new car, or even less.
Okay, it's going to be very cheap to get there. Okay, that I buy. But then once you're there,
then you get to another question, which is who wants to settle Mars? Okay, settling Mars is not really a project for governments. It's a project for private groups. And why would they want to settle Mars? Certain groups would want to settle Mars to have a place of their own. In other words, there's always going to be groups of people with their own sets of ideals who want to have a place where they could go and make the world their way.
But they need to earn a living, right? To afford what they will import from Earth.
But wait. Let's not reduce it to making a living. There's lots of ways to make a living. For many people, being able to live your life in the way that you want, to have a kind of society that you want, that's the priority, and then you figure out how to make a living doing that. Okay, there are people in Finland who hunt reindeer. Now they don't do that because that was the best business case that they, could find, doing charts and graphs and stuff like that.
It's a less costly way of living.
They do that because there's a certain form, a way of life that they want to have.
I know. It's much more affordable, right?
What?
It's much more affordable as a way of life than living on Mars. So it's fine.
But what I'm saying is, if you take the three most remarkable colonization efforts that has occurred over the past 400 years. Okay.
I hope you will mention the Polynesian colonization of the Pacific.
Well, I wasn't about to. I don't have enough facts about the various expeditions. But
I have a great book to recommend to you.
Okay. Well, if you take the Pilgrims going to Massachusetts, you take the Mormons going to Utah, if you take
Jewish people,
Jews going to Palestine, yes. None of these were done for economic reasons. They were done for transcendental reasons. They were done by people who wanted to have a world of their own that could realize their own ideals, and they were willing to undergo considerable hardship and economic sacrifice in order to do that. I mean, to take the Mormons, for example. Okay, at that time, there was plenty of land available everywhere in the West, in particular in California and Oregon. They stopped in the Salt Lake precisely because no one else wanted to stop there, because they could have this place for themselves and realize the Mormon ideals. Okay, the Jews would have been much easier time going to New York than Palestine. The Pilgrims left Holland because the Dutch were being too nice. They were being assimilated. And they said, we can't have this. We got to go to someplace else where we can, have our godly city. And okay. Now, once again, I think there's always going to be people that have ideals that make them want to have their own place. There'll also be, unfortunately, people that will need to find their own place because they've been kicked out of the place that they had. There'll be them as well. So there'll be people wanting to establish colonies on Mars, both because they want to and others because they need to. And then they go there, and then they'll figure out how to make it work. Okay, how are we going to make this work? And then they will. I'm going to have to go soon. But
okay. Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to hold you. I had so many more questions, so maybe we can do a second episode at some point.
Sometime, yeah.
Perfect. Maybe one last question, if you don't mind. Yeah, so I wanted, because you've said somewhere that Titan, in many respects, the moon of Saturn, is the best place to colonize. So yeah, so if Titan was as far from Earth as Mars, which one would you want to settle first, as for you, if it was just as far, from Earth?
Well, that's an interesting question. I still lean towards Mars, although there's a lot to be said for Titan. It's 1/7 gravity, and you've got air that's 4 times as thick as Earth. So on Titan, you could strap wings on your arms and fly like a bird. So that could be a lot of fun. On the other hand, the air is at 90 Kelvin.
Very cold.
Yeah. And, you know, I've lived in cold places, but not that cold. And so I'll take Mars.
Okay, you would still take Mars. Okay,
Yeah.
You're not gonna change your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, I would quickly like to show you a design for Mars to do better than domes, and maybe you can tell me what you think.
Okay.
Okay. So can you see the screen? So yeah, so the idea here is, instead of having a dome, because a dome, you know, cannot be too big, you cannot really extend the dome, you need to build more domes. Honestly, it's a broken design in many respects. What in case we have a thin, flexible, tensile membrane, so it's supported, you see, by these cables, steel cables, that can be discreetly placed here and there, you know, anchored to the ground. They can be pile driven with a very generic hardware, and it can be just as large as possible. So this is a design from Casey Henmer. So have you heard about that idea? What do you think about it?
Well, my criticism, okay, you can't have a flat pressure surface. It has to bend. Now I've seen something. So this wouldn't work in the way described. Because it needs to have a finite radius of curvature. Now, there in my book, The New World on Mars, there is an image of a concept put forward by a French team, actually, of it's almost like a Gothic cathedral of domes. Well, they're not exactly domes. They're arches,
like cylinder, like
cylindrical arches that go on. It's kind of like a Gothic cathedral that is held in tension as opposed to compression, which
same as here, yeah.
Okay, but it's in the book. You should see the picture of it. I kind of like that concept a lot because it allows for very large structures with long lines of sight, and but it's based on sound engineering principles, whereas this.
No, because to be fair to that design, so the couplings to the surface at the perimeter, they don't have to resist enormous pull-out forces. They can be done with a set of relatively simple buried steel membranes. So the issue at you know, on the perimeter is not that much of a problem. They can be pile driven with generic hardware. No need to excavate a trench like you would for the dome foundation. So I don't know.
No, I agree that. All I'm saying is, this concept, he's kind of pushing in the same direction as that French design, except that the people who designed that French design had a more complete understanding of engineering and what would actually work.
Yeah. And I had another quick one as well for you, if you don't mind. So you've written that book, The Case for Nukes, and you've said that basically regulation is the problem why, you know, we haven't been innovating as much in the nuclear realm. But if you look at the natural experiment happening in China, where actually they have every incentive to produce as much energy as possible, and they can't be bothered with too much regulation. When you look at that natural experiment for the past 15 years, what you can see is that nuclear is growing, but not as fast as wind and solar. And actually solar is the one really booming, you know, and now that you can couple solar and batteries, you can have, you know, electricity 99% of the time if you overbuild solar panels and batteries.
I don't know about that. I do know China is building nuclear reactors very fast right now, and they intend, there's about 450 functioning commercial reactors in the world. China intends to build another 400 inside China between now and 2050. So I don't know about these figures.
But solar is growing even faster. That's what I'm saying, you know. So it's
like I'm not convinced about that. And the and there's tremendous exaggeration about solar energy. The right near where I live here, there's a big field of solar panels that was built at one time, and they're all pointed the wrong way. They don't generate any power at all. They were just built to take advantage of some government subsidy. So I think it can be pretty deceptive, the stories you hear about solar energy. And we've seen the results of this, of course, in Germany, where there was a big push for wind and solar. But in fact, if you look at the power that really is generated in Germany, they're burning coal. That's what they got. Germany has 5 times the carbon emissions as France per unit of power produced. And that's what their renewable energy program has gotten. Whereas France, 75% nuclear, another 15% hydroelectric, it's 90% carbon free.
Yeah. But I think the story with solar is really changing now. These days, these years, and what we saw previously was not really indicative of what's happening now. But anyway, so and regarding fusion, so you've said that
I really have to go soon.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, next time maybe then. Okay, great. Thanks, Robert. I'm very happy you could make it. I'm very much honored again to have you on the podcast. Thanks again, and talk to you next. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Salut.
Bye. Salut.